So we're going to see what's creeping up over the edge this week. And I'm telling you, it is hard to keep up with this, with the corny B-movie monsters that are making their way to shore. Yeah. So this week in Woke. Okay, so we're doing this so that we keep an eye on the worldview around us that is shaping our world, shaping our culture, shaping the news, shaping education, shaping our neighbors, so that we can make sense of it, see it, understand it, notice it when it shows up, and continue to learn how to respond and react as followers of Jesus Christ. And then we're making our way through significant sections of the book of Ezekiel, because I think there's a lot going on in Ezekiel that is incredibly important and relevant for us today. To hear how God speaks to Ezekiel about what's going on with his people in Jerusalem and in exile, and what the presence of God is doing and so forth. So that's why we're doing things the way that we're doing them on Tuesday nights. But some stuff for you here on This Week in Woke. This was, I don't know. This is out of an online publication called The Christian Century. The Christian Century is very definitely a left-of-center theological publication. So you're going to find all kinds of interesting things on their website. This was an interesting one lately. When localism becomes nationalism at the farmers market, I found something I didn't expect: white supremacists. Right? So the argument of this article is that more and more people who are bringing their produce to sell at farmers markets are in fact white supremacists. So here's part of what she says. Farmers markets across the nation and even abroad have in recent years begun to attract white supremacist groups. You read that sentence, and part of your brain goes, so the last time I was at a farmer's market, I don't remember seeing a Nazi flag, but I'm sure they were there somewhere. But we're also remembering that this is how vocabulary works in the woke world. They strip a phrase like that of what could be useful meaning. If you could actually label something where someone is white supremacist, they pull that meaning out of it and they refill it with their meaning. So that phrase doesn't mean the same to them as it does to other people. And so now apparently farmers markets are just full of white supremacists. And you got to be really careful whose kale you buy, because who knows what's happening. Kelly Weil reported at the Daily Beast that I just love this stuff because it's sophomoric. The far right's love of the markets plays into a larger fascist talking point that idealizes pastoral life and demonizes degenerate urban living. Just listen to how all these phrases are just thrown together, intended to make you think that if you are not woke and you bring produce to a farmer's market, you're playing into a larger white supremacist talking point. The contrast attempts to cast white supremacy as the purer alternative. So you read through the article. She has one piece of anecdotal evidence of someone who apparently was a Nazi at some farmer's market in the Midwest somewhere, and they got kicked out of the farmer's market. It's just anecdotal evidence. But the thrust of the article has everything to do with who you voted for. And if you vote on the right end of the spectrum, if you are not woke enough, you are automatically in the camp of white supremacist. So we saw some of this last week with the denial of Darwinism is now the brand new white supremacy. So it's just this term that means anything you want it to mean, and you use it to demonize anybody who votes differently than you do, has a different political ideology than you do. So she lists no white supremacist groups, but she lists plenty of people who voted differently than she did. So that's who the white supremacists are. What? Yeah, now hold. Yeah, hold your horses, racist. Yeah.
Wasn't the Soviet Union
Yes, so in the Soviet Union and China, Eric is absolutely right. One of the ideals was the peasant farmer. It didn't, I mean, forget the fact that Stalin killed tens of millions of peasant farmers, or Chairman Mao killed tens of millions of peasant farmers. That became their ideal, is the person who was going to work for the state out in the fields producing bread and producing rice. And now we've just got this completely convoluted notion, right, that if you're bringing carrots to the farmer's market and you didn't vote for Biden, you're a white supremacist. You've got to be careful. Those vegetables grown by white supremacists showing up at the farmer's market. So what do you do with stuff like this? You continue to do the kinds of things that we're talking about. You just deny the premise. You just refuse to accept the definition, the assumed definition of phrases like this. Prove it, right? You just refuse to accept this brand new definition of this term, and you say that term actually has a meaning, and it has a useful meaning, but it's not what you say it means, right? So I'm going to go to the farmer's market, and I'm going to enjoy. I'm not going to enjoy buying kale. Nobody should enjoy buying kale. But buy your local produce. No, that's right. Nazi kale is even worse than normal kale. Who knows what happens next, right? So that was an actual pin that someone had made. And so they would spread that around the farmers markets where they lived. And, that's not at a stand where there's an actual Nazi flag. That's just at a stand where you've got a white local farmer who probably didn't vote left, right? So the woke world just continues and continues. So I ran across this last week, a handful of articles about the same topic. And you can only find, or at least I could only find, articles on this topic outside of U.S. media. So this comes from The Spectator. It's a British news outlet, and there's a lot of these sorts of European or British news outlets that have this kind of information. So after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, these kinds of articles are starting to come out. So the question is, did gender studies lose Afghanistan? How Ivy League diplomats sought to remake Afghanistan in Harvard's image. So here's part of what the author says here. So alongside the billions for bombs went hundreds of millions for gender studies in Afghanistan. According to U.S. government reports, $787 million was spent on gender programs in Afghanistan. But that substantially understates the actual total, since gender goals were folded into practically every undertaking America made in the country. So it turns out that for a while now, especially the work of the State Department, everything they did in Afghanistan, trying to, rebuild villages and rebuild parliament and, on and on, came with not just gender goals, but with the LGBTQ agenda. Right, so all of this money is being poured into that agenda, being put into Afghanistan. The article goes on to note, according to a USAID observer, the gender ideology included in American aid routinely caused rebellions out in the provinces, directly causing the instability America was supposedly fighting. To get Afghanistan's parliament to endorse the women's rights measures it wanted, America resorted to bribing them. And there was a link there about how the bribing worked. Soon, bribery became the norm for getting anything done in parliament. So it wasn't just a Western vision of life, a Western liberal democracy that, was trying to be sort of built in Afghanistan. It turns out it was Western sexual decadence. Not just women's rights, but the LGBTQ agenda that was being pushed in Afghanistan with US dollars and so forth, and actually causing trouble inside of Afghanistan. So I had heard this, and I did a little bit of research. I learned something this last week I had no clue was true. So the president of Afghanistan, when we withdrew from Afghanistan, he split really quick. His name was Ashraf Ghani. Did you know where Ashraf Ghani came from? He was a member of the D.C. swamp. He didn't live in Afghanistan. He was Afghani, but he ran a large nonprofit think tank in Washington, D.C. when he was tapped to become the president of Afghanistan. Both of his sons are American citizens in the Northeast. One of them helped to run Pete Buttigieg's campaign when he ran for president and is still being paid by at least one think tank inside of D.C. So Ashraf Ghani, the president of Afghanistan, came straight out of the Northeast DC swamp, Ivy League woke kind of world. So we don't hear those things until someone just sort of mentions it, and then all of a sudden you look at it and go, oh, so that's his background. That's where he came from. The Russian embassy reported that when he fled with 4 cars and 1 helicopter, all of them filled with cash. So Ashraf Ghani, that's what happened to him. Keeping on this beautiful theme, in Texas, reproductive freedom congregations catch on as new abortion law looms. So this was reported both in the Washington Post and an organization called Religion News. It's just Religion News is just that. It's just a news site on various and a broad set of religious issues and so forth. But the Texas law that went into effect a few days ago, I think it was midnight Friday, something like that, that essentially made abortion after 6 weeks illegal, or at least reportable to the state. The Supreme Court had refused an injunction, and then late that night, allowed the law to go into effect and just openly refused the injunctions to actually stop the law. So this law goes into effect, and just the explosion over the last few days over this issue, and everything that comes with the pro-choice movement and so forth. So part of it is happening inside of churches. Now, churches through the years, some of them have chosen to be sanctuary congregations for immigrants. Actually, physically, if you can make it inside of that Catholic parish, that Catholic church, or whatever the case is, then you've received sanctuary from, being deported or from ICE or something like that. They now, these churches are considering themselves sanctuary for reproductive rights. So now several churches, and as of now, several dozen churches are trained and are training themselves to become sanctuary congregations for reproductive rights. So here's how it got reported. These churches are designated as reproductive freedom congregations. And in order to claim this label, faith leaders go through a months-long process to not only learn about reproductive health care, but also how to advocate for better access to services that include contraception, abortion, prenatal and pregnancy care, and comprehensive sex education. Spearheaded by a movement of faith leaders known as Just Texas. And you got to love these turns of phrases. They don't mean only Texas, they mean justice in Texas. Just Texas, Faith Voices for Reproductive Justice. Pastors are trained on how to talk about reproductive health from the pulpit. So we take our point of view, our politics, whatever the case is, and we just inject it straight into the veins of the pastors who are into this. To earn this designation, congregations have also voted to affirm a set of principles, agreeing that they will trust and respect women. And let it be known here that we don't do that here, okay? Just to be clear, you guys, hopefully you understand my sense of humor by now. Trust and respect women, and that access to reproductive health services is a moral and social good. And reproductive health services means places like Planned Parenthood. It means, by and large, abortion. The RFC designation is similarly modeled after churches that show support for LGBTQ people by declaring as open and affirming congregations. It's a way to help people. So you get this designation, you can promote yourself like this so that people know who you are and they can feel safe to come. It's a way to help people who wish to find and attend progressive churches that show they support women, Forbes told Religion News Service. Right? So all of this is an ethic. All of this is a moral point of view. All of this is a belief about how human beings work, the value of the unborn, and on and on. So this whole thing comes as a package. And it's always enlightening. It should never be surprising that when you read about reproductive freedom congregations, somewhere in that mix, connected like a Siamese twin, is every other one of these sexual ideologies. So it's actually patterned after churches that have done the same training for LGBTQ kind of stuff, right? So it's all part of the same blob. It's all part of the same moral universe. So every woke agenda is wrapped up with all of the others. You don't get to pick one and not the others. And companies and organizations and Christian organizations are learning this. Some of them are learning it the hard way. If this ideology starts to make its way into an organization, it becomes very hard to either limit it or get rid of it. It just kind of comes in and just begins to sort of do what it does. It's a colonizing point of view, and we're seeing this, right? Again, this whole point of view is not about fixing some of the problems that, are sort of around the edges, the tattered edges of our culture. It's about changing the very core of why we think human beings exist. What we do, how we do it, it's just about changing everything at the very core, and it cannot coexist with other ideologies. So it intends to colonize. That's just how it's built. That is what it does. So this new woke morality, the more we see it, the more we talk about it, we need to understand that they take it as essential and necessary. Not one of several ideas at the table that will help us reach a positive conclusion. It's that if I get this idea on the table, you need to understand it's going to be the only idea on the table. It's obtuse. It apparently doesn't understand how Afghanis think, right? It's obtuse. It only sees one narrow version of a cultural reality and wants to take that and impose it on everybody else. And it's colonialist, which is ironic because the claim about everybody else, what's that? The claim about everybody else is that Western liberalism is colonialist, and how rotten are white colonialists when they've taken this ideology and foisted it upon villages in Afghanistan. I mean, I want to find some way to create that mind explosion emoji. Every time I say stuff like this, you watch it happen. It is hardcore colonialist, right? What's that? I can't hear. All right. Can Eric hear that? Because she calls it the Borg. Yes. That's right, she does. It is. You will be assimilated. Yeah. All right, so we watch this, we keep our eyes on this stuff, and as much as we can kind of joke about it, I think is good enough to do that, but I think we understand how this continues to seep its way into things. And if I can put a handful of things together for next week, we're going to dig into how this is happening in American education, because there's a handful of things going on right now that are, as far as I can tell right now, are profoundly nefarious. And think pieces are being written now by educational leaders and by public thinkers that are pulled right out of the Communist Manifesto. And I don't mean that lightly. They're writing articles about how the best way forward for education is to treat children as property of the state. These are headlines that are being written in major newspapers, right? So that's just right out of Karl Marx and Communist Manifesto. There's just a lot going on. So we'll see what we can figure out for next week.